Дыни, арбузы, пшеничные булки, щедрый зажиточный край. И на престоле сидит в Петербурге.
Hello, everyone. It is my privilege today to speak with Scott Ritter, a former Marine intelligence officer and a former UN weapons inspector who spent a lot of time working in Iraq, a lot of time living in Russia, and also working in Russia and Israel. His popularity has been exploding all around the world, including here in the US and especially in Russia, for his courageously speaking out about the truth and the pragmatic reality on the ground in Ukraine, and just as importantly, for the reasons behind and the NATO and the US part in this conflict. So I want to welcome Mr. Ritter. How are you today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you. I know you've been doing tons of work, tons of streams talking about what's going on in Ukraine. And my first natural question to you, what motivates you to put so much effort into covering this crisis?
Well, I mean, to be honest, when I've been covering this crisis before it became a crisis. I have what I call my day job, which is doing geopolitical analysis for a organization called Energy Intelligence Group. And I write for them, weekly, and then monthly I write columns. And so I've been tracking the crisis with Ukraine for some time now, and actually have been predicting this very war for. It was inevitable. I mean, one only has to watch the United States and NATO, basically back Russia into a corner, and you realize that there's going to be a war. So I've been doing this for some time. What I haven't been doing are podcasts. It's just not my thing. I mean, I watch some podcasts. I enjoy watching experts, talk about issues. I never saw myself doing this. And I wrote a couple articles that I published back when I had a Twitter page, and people started reaching out saying, "Hey, I'd like to interview you on my podcast." I said, "Well, sure, why not? I mean, if you're going to take the time to write an article and publish the article, you have to show people courtesy when they want to ask you questions about that article. That otherwise, I mean, why do it?" And so I said, "Certainly, I'll do that." And I think my position was seen as being against the mainstream, and some people found that to be a breath of fresh air, I guess. I'd also like to believe that it was fairly accurate, fact-based, reasoned analysis. I don't claim to be to have perfect insight. In fact, I claim the exact opposite. I have absolutely imperfect insight into what actually is going on in Ukraine, just as we all do. We're thousands of miles away looking at this, through the prism of other people who are on the ground. What I do bring to the equation is a background as a intelligence professional and as a military professional who has direct experience both in terms of understanding the Soviet/Russian art of war and having participated in the last large ground combat prior to this, so that is Operation Desert Storm. So I understand the logistics that are required, the intelligence support, operational concepts, strategic concepts, etc. So I view myself as a tool. I'm like a hammer, and people have a whole bunch of nails they want pounded in, so they keep calling me up to be the hammer to help them pound the nails. And so I do the podcasts. It's exhausting. I'll be honest with you. It's there are days. I mean, it's not just exhausting. I earn my living writing, not speaking on podcasts. And there are times when it has a detrimental impact on my ability to write, just because I'm so tired from doing these. But again, we're in a unique period of time when a lot of people have questions about a very complicated issue, and I just feel that there's I'm not going to there's an intellectual obligation to follow through. Again, I keep writing, I keep publishing, people keep having questions about what I write. Therefore, I have an intellectual obligation to be available to answer those questions. That's why when you asked if I would come on your podcast, the answer was yes. I mean, if I can do it, I'll do it.
I very much appreciate it. And you know, I don't want you to say the same things that you've been saying for many days, with which many of our viewers would be familiar with, about how the Russian army will necessarily and inevitably dominate the Ukrainian army, and about the role of NATO and the US in inciting what's going on, and instead of trying to put out the fires. I'm going to ask you slightly different questions. You know, in one of your recent streams, you mentioned that one of the problems and one of the deeper reasons for this conflict, or this long-standing animosity between the US and Russia, is that Americans, quoting you, do not understand Russian history, Russian culture, and Russian soul. I can imagine that you could write a whole book about it, but briefly, what are some of the things that Americans don't understand about Russia, and what they could really use understanding to make these things better?
Well, I'll just start by noting that, you know, at the end of the Second World War, we being the United States, had put in place academic institutions that were tasked by the U.S. government to be able to prepare diplomats and soldiers to interface effectively with their Soviet counterparts, because there was a recognition that we would be called upon to, work with the Soviets. And this became even more important as the post-war period transitioned into the Cold War period. I think there was a recognition that our goal should be not to go to war with the Soviet Union, but to find ways to avoid going to war. And the best way to do that would be able to effectively interact with your Soviet counterparts. Now, to do that, you have to be trained properly. And so a system of Russian area studies was developed, both at the undergraduate level and, more importantly, at the graduate level, that focused on what I call just the fundamentals. The history, the culture, the music, the literature, and then they also, these programs invariably ask people to go over and meet and live with, spend a semester abroad, which is very important. Not just for the language, but in the Cold War, and I was guilty of this. I mean, I grew up overseas. I grew up in Germany and Turkey during the Cold War. I mean, right there on the front lines. My dad was an Air Force officer. People can chuckle about it today, but kill a commie for mommy was literally what we believed in. I mean, I was raised to kill a commie for mommy. I was better dead than red. These colors don't run. We were hyper patriotic long before. We were hyper patriotic long before the 9/11 crowd took over. We got to hold on. These people were supposed to have an interview with me at 7:00, and I think they forgot what time it is. So they're going to keep calling until I don't know how to silence them. But it's their problem because they missed their window, and we've got our window. Yes. But the fact is, I was as guilty as anybody of when you have to learn to hate. I mean this in all sincerity. You have to be taught to hate. And it's easy to be taught to hate. You know how you teach people to hate? Mm-hmm. Through ignorance. Because ignorance means that you don't know what's going on. Therefore, you're fearful of the unknown. And so to hate the Soviet Union, all you do is you demonize them. You oversimplify them. You turn them into cartoon characters, Boris and Natasha, things of that nature. So that you don't view them as people. That's why it's so important that you have to travel overseas and meet the Russian people. Not because they're inherently superior to you, not because they're inferior to you. Because they're human beings. And when you I'm sorry about that.
It's okay, no problem.
When you I can't even, I don't even know where they went to right now. There we go. We'll just shut that down. And okay, do I still have you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because my camera, whatever, Matt, there we go. I apologize. I'm
No problem.
they're calling me.
It happens.
But the point is, you got to meet these people because you find out they're humans. You find out they actually, first of all, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. If they're guys, they like girls. I mean, that's sort of a unifying principle for especially military men. You sit there and you both go, "Wow, that's a good-looking girl." Now, that sounds very sexist, and it is, and I don't want to overemphasize that. But what I'm trying to say is, we're all humans. Guys are guys, whether you're a Russian guy or an American guy. Gals are gals, whether you're a Russian gal or an American gal. You like the same things. We find out that the only real barrier for us is the language. And if we can learn each other's language, we can work through that barrier, and we realize we're really the same people. We might have different governments, but the one thing we all agree on is that governments tend to be problematic. We're never happy with our government, and so so we did that back during that period of time, and that was the approach that I took. That was the approach that I took in trying to learn about Russia and the studies, and that's how we trained our officers. I'm going to have to send them a text or something that says stop.
Of course, of course.
Oh. Okay. Hopefully they got the message. So we'll find out. No, they didn't get the message.
No, they did not. They're persistent.
They are very persistent. I'll say them one more time. Let's see if they can read. Let me. And okay, there. I was very polite. It was Marine Corps typing, and we'll see. Again, I apologize for that.
No problem.
So you have this program designed to immerse people into the culture, and it's important. I did that when I was in college. I studied history. I focused on Russian history. I took the language. Unfortunately, I played football and I drank beer at the same time, so my language skills were never very, very good. But I studied the literature. I studied the culture. I attended concerts, and trust me, American college guys who play football don't like to go to classic music, Russian music, listen to Tchaikovsky, but I did, because that's how you learn. I did it with a focus, though. I wasn't trying to do this to learn to like the Russians. I still hated them. I wanted to kill them. It was the Cold War. I was joining the Marine Corps. My job was to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver. But I wanted to know my enemy. And then I had the opportunity to travel over there and live there for 2 years. And that changed everything. The fact is, they weren't my enemy. I mean, if ordered, I would have to do what I'd have to do. But these weren't people who I felt spent their every waking moment trying to hurt my country. These weren't people who were trying to hurt my family. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to live their lives. And we were both living under the threat of imminent nuclear conflict that would kill us both equally. And we were working to eliminate these nuclear weapons. So that's how I approached it. And I ended up marrying a Georgian woman. We have family in Russia. We have family in Georgia. We're in contact. When I was over there, I made friends with I know we're not allowed to say that, but I've actually made friends with Russian people, and I'm still in contact with them today. I care about these people. I'm sure they care about me, and that's important. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, something happened, because during the times of the Soviet Union, we treated the Soviets as equals. They were our peers. Mm-hmm. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia stopped being an equal, and we started treating Russia like a defeated nation, like a defeated people. They were our lessers now. They were no longer equals. We treated them as lessers. And something happens in the mindset of people who are preparing to deal with this. First thing is they started shutting down the old Russian area studies programs, shutting them down. And the new programs that emerged weren't so much about learning about the soul and the character and the linguistics it was learning how to exploit Russia. They were literally courses on how to bring democracy to Russia, how to bring capitalism to Russia, how to save Russia from being Russia. That's the wrong mindset. I mean, that might be a good mindset if your focus is, the economic exploitation of Russia. Maybe that's how you want to train yourself, but you will never know the Russian people by behaving that way. You will never know the Russian character, the Russian soul. You will have no insights into how they think, what they believe, how they feel. All you'll be doing is exploiting them. And in doing so, engendering them, I think, I'm not going to say hatred, but engendering some hard feelings on the part of Russians towards what you're doing. And I think that's where we are today. We have a nation that stopped studying Russia, and we now have replaced it with a nation that seeks to manage Russia, as if Russia is our problem to manage. We managed Russia during the Yeltsin period poorly, but we did. I mean, people talk about stolen elections. The 1996 election in Russia was 100% stolen by the United States. We brag about it. Time magazine front page cover proclaiming how we bought the election. And then we've been resentful since late 1999, early 2000, when Vladimir Putin became president. We've been resentful of his, of his desire to make Russia a great nation again. There's nothing wrong with Russia being a great nation. It is a great nation. Doesn't mean it's the greatest nation. Doesn't mean it's better than America. Russians may believe so, but I mean, Americans, we don't have to sit there and say, oh, Russia is everything. No, Russia is Russia. That's the important thing. Russia is Russia. Nothing more, nothing less. But you need to respect that. You need to understand that, and you need to deal with that. And we don't. We continue to this day to try and manage Russia. We try to impose democracy on Russia, but it's not democracy. Democracy has grown from within. I mean, we should study our own history. American democracy came from America. Nobody brought democracy over here and said, here, let me teach you how to be. We had to learn it. Every successful democratic nation learned how to be democratic on their own terms. Mm-hmm. What we've done is we have corrupted the principles of democracy because we're seeking to impose our vision, which is derived from American history, American culture, American imperatives, and we're trying to impose that on Russia, ignoring their history, ignoring their culture, ignoring their imperatives, and it fails. And when it fails, we say, see, they're undemocratic. That's not true. Russia is a democracy. It's not a Jeffersonian democracy. Could Russia improve as a democracy? Maybe. That's up to Russia. We don't get to say. We don't have a vote. It's none of our business. But I will tell you this, if we left Russia alone and let Russia sort out Russia's problems on its own, I have a funny feeling, based upon what I know of the Russian people, they do a pretty good job of it. They'd come up with something that worked. But we keep interfering. And in doing so, we keep cutting the legs out from underneath them. We're doing that economically now. I mean, how can you possibly say that you support the Russian people while imposing the most stringent economic sanctions imaginable on them? Sanctions that are designed to hurt the Russian people. Plain and simple. So anyway, that's just a long, rambling answer to your question. But
yes, just a couple of observations about your answer. We've been trying to teach a few parts of the world democracy. We were trying to intervene. It didn't work so well in a few places, and yet we don't learn a lesson. And I'm sure you would agree with the question that Donald Trump asked not so long ago: what's wrong with getting along with Russia? That question made me feel so good, regardless of who he is and what you might think of him. Hearing that, I've been waiting for years to hear that.
But it took somebody who is completely outside of the establishment to say that, because inside the establishment, you can't say that. You can't even hint at it. You can't even suggest it, because the establishment that exists today is not about getting along with Russia. It's about managing Russia, exploiting Russia. I've written about this in the past. I call this class of people who advise, administrations, past and present. I call them the Putin whisperers, because all they do is they run around and they whisper in the Putin. Putin is to blame for everything. Putin is evil. Putin is to blame. Putin is to blame. Putin is to blame. But the only thing they can do right about Putin is spell his name. They don't know anything about him. They grossly over-exaggerate. He was a lieutenant colonel in the KGB. The last time I checked the KGB's chain of command, lieutenant colonels, while respectable rank, are still pretty low on the totem pole. And he was doing a job in, Berlin, East Berlin. He wasn't managing, policy for the KGB. Now, later he did. I mean, later on he became the head of the FSB and all that. But my point is, they talk about him as if he's a Zen spy master, as opposed to saying that he's actually a very intelligent man, a very honorable man who, if you want to really look at Vladimir Putin, I don't think you look at Berlin. I think you look at St. Petersburg. I think you look at his time working for the mayor of St. Petersburg, Sobchak, and look at how he behaved there. Talk to former American diplomats who were in St. Petersburg, people who were Americans who were over there with non-governmental organizations who met with Putin at a time when everybody else was corrupt. Putin was the uncorruptible. He didn't take bribes. He listened. I mean, people were stunned. They said that the one thing that separated him from others is how he listened to them when they spoke, and then how he asked relevant questions. I think that's the period of time, if you want to know who Vladimir Putin is, that's the time you got to focus on, because that's where he matured as a politician. Sure, you retain some of your intelligence past. I have. But, being a spy is just being a spy. It's not superhuman strength. It's actually a pretty screwed up way to go about living life, because it's about exploiting human frailties and working weakness into your strength. That's not the way people are supposed to operate. And so that's why I spend less time focused on, Vladimir Putin, the former KGB officer, and I spend more time focusing on Vladimir Putin, the honest politician in a sea of corruption. And I just wish people would do that. But instead, we have these Putin whisperers who have all written the same PhD, which said, Vladimir Putin, a study in authoritarian dictatorship. There it is. That's the paper they wrote, and that's it.
Scott, what do you say to people, to those Putin whisperers who say, look, how can you call him this a democracy if Putin has been around for this many years, about 20 years, and he's still going to be in power until 2030 something? What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing I say to them is, please go back and take a look at the 1990s in Russia. Please, before you talk to me about Vladimir Putin today, let's look at Russia post-Cold War, from 1992 to 1999, and Boris Yeltsin, our man, the guy we put there, the guy we sustained, and then talk to the average Russian about how much they hated that period. I'm not talking about the oligarchs who robbed Russia blind. I'm talking about the average Russian citizen, the retirees that saw their pensions go away. Workers saw that they were working for nothing. No economic opportunities. It was just a bad time for Russia. And so I say, okay, there's your baseline. So the first thing we have to say is Vladimir Putin's number one job wasn't to repair democracy. His number one job was to repair Russia, And he tried to do so. But how can you repair Russia when the entire time he was trying to implement new policies, he was being undermined by the United States, who was going in and using Russia's weakness to buy politicians to try and rather than let Vladimir Putin and the Russian government fix Russia, to try and fix it for him, to say, you're not good enough. After his first 2 terms in office, the one thing that again, I have not talked to Vladimir Putin, so I can't sit here and say I know what he was thinking. But my assessment is he took a look at the situation. He said, if I step aside, the West is going to come in here and we're going to get Boris Yeltsin all over again. We're going to go back to the 1990s. We're not ready for genuine democracy right now. So that's why he did his cute little trick with Dmitry Medvedev. And what was the first thing the United States did when Medvedev became president? We didn't realize that Putin's smarter than we are when it comes to matters dealing with Russia. And we said, aha, we're going to have regime change, but we can't call it regime change. We'll call it a reset. We're going to say, this people just don't get the hint. We're going to call it the reset. We're going to go in there and we're going to woo Dmitry Medvedev. We're going to bring him over to our side, and we're going to make him push Putin out of the picture totally. That's called regime change. And our current president at the time was the vice president. He went to Moscow in March of 2011, and he spoke to the Russian opposition. Okay, so right off the bat, you have the American vice president speaking to the Russian opposition during a time when we have a policy called reset, which is really regime change. And he said, I don't believe Vladimir Putin should run for re-election because it would be bad for him and it'll be bad for Russia. So that's a threat against Putin and a threat against Russia made by the sitting vice president at a time when our policy regime changed. So Putin, of course, disregarded. He came back in. But they say, Russia's not a democracy. Really, what did he win the I think the election was in March of 2012. What was his percentage? 54%, I think. 52, 54%. Dictators don't win elections by 52 to 54%. They just don't. Dictators win elections by 98%. So to call this, to say that he wasn't a Democrat, come on, he was elected using democratic processes. Now, since then, he has cracked down on the political opposition because they have been infiltrated by Western intelligence services as part of this policy of regime change, also known as the failed reset. Even this last constitutional changes that Vladimir Putin made to extend his ability to stay in presidency, they were made so that Russia can have I think Putin is desperately searching for the right mix of power sharing, but in a way that doesn't open up Russia to be exploited by the West, where the West is still sitting there waiting to come in with their money to buy politicians to manage Russia. We still think it's our job to manage Russia. And Putin right now, I think, is fighting a two-front war. On the one hand, he's, I believe, literally, legitimately trying to get a Russian form of democracy up and running. But it's hard to do that when you have the West trying to undermine everything you do to impose their vision of democracy on Russia. So, is Vladimir Putin the perfect democratic leader? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the conditions in Russia aren't conducive to the perfect democratic leader. If the West would just let Russia be Russia, maybe they'd have produced a democratic system by now. But right now, Putin understands that left to their own devices, the West will seek to return Russia to the 1990s, to the era of Boris Yeltsin. And no Russian wants that. Maybe Navalny wants it, but nobody else wants it.
Well, thank you for this incredible depth, deep insight, and I'm sure the viewers cannot thank you enough for giving this unconventional analysis. That really helps us understand rather than demonize Putin and the whole system there. I want to switch gears and ask you a couple of pointed questions. Are you surprised that so many of the Americans, of the American public, after being lied to for 2 years by mainstream media about masks, about lockdowns, about vaccines, about mandates, they're perfectly happy to blindly buy the narrative about Russia's invasion in Ukraine, that Putin just woke up one day for no reason whatsoever, no basis whatsoever, or how they say, unprovoked and unjustified. He just went in. Are you surprised that so many people are buying it without checking it for themselves?
No, I'm not. I'm not surprised at all. Again, we need to answer that question. We need to first talk about your average American. I'm not talking. Look, every time I say average American, I get immediate feedback from people who say, I'm not like that. Okay, you're not the average American then. I'm just talking about the average American who doesn't have a PhD in Russian area studies, who doesn't have a master's degree in Russian area studies, who doesn't even have a bachelor's degree in Russian area studies, who's never studied anything about Russia at all. That's the vast majority of Americans. And they don't want to study Russia. I mean, they're not intellectually curious about Russia. They don't have time to be intellectually curious. It's tough being an American. I mean, we have this thing called the American dream that everybody's chasing. The house, 2 cars in the garage, the perfect family. Everybody's chasing this dream, and very few are able to actually catch it. And when you do catch it, it's hard to hold on to. You got husbands and wives working, both fully employed. Sometimes they have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, so you can pay that mortgage, pay the car payment. By the time they come home, they aren't going to be going to night school to learn Russian or study Russian area studies. They aren't going to, log on to the internet and study Russian. They're going to sit down in front of the TV after a dinner, and they've got about 30 minutes max where they're going to watch the news. But they don't, they just had a hard day at work. The last thing they want to do is think. They want to be entertained. So the purpose of the news media is to entertain them. Now, entertainment can come in several forms. I mean, you just look at movies. We got comedies, we got horror movies, we got dramas, we got military drama. So it doesn't mean that entertainment has to be laughs. War is the greatest entertainment there is. War is, people will tune in to watch a war every single time it happens. So they're entertained. Crime is a huge entertainment. So the more riots you have in the street, the more people are going to watch it on TV. That's just the way it is. If it bleeds, it leads. That's an old, TV say, or TV saying. So these people just don't have the time to learn this. They want to be wrapped in a cocoon of comfort. That's the American dream, comfort. It's consumer-based comfort. I go out and buy things that make me happy. And I wrap myself in this. And as long as I can sit in my little cocoon of comfort and nobody bothers me, I'm happy. Now, when somebody comes in and bothers me, I get unhappy. That's why you saw in COVID, people got a little unhappy because it bothered their cocoon of comfort. But that was an immediate impact on their reality. Russia doesn't have an immediate impact. Even this, the energy prices right now, they call it Putin's tax, but it's not. It's Biden's bad policy. It's just all it is. It's bad policy on the part of an elected official. And the people that buy into the notion of Putin's tax means that they don't know anything about Putin. They don't know anything about Russia. They don't know anything about what's really going on. And this is the hard part, because here you and I are having this conversation. And I would bet that the people who watch this are not your average Americans. The people who watch this are actually people who have taken the time to taken their precious time, by the way, because time is a precious commodity, and they've taken their precious time and they've decided, this is how I want to spend my time, furthering my studies and furthering my knowledge about Russia. I joke about this, but I have some friends. We used to go to Monday Night Football before COVID came. Maybe we'll start doing it again. But back when I was doing the Iraq thing, and they were all like, oh, Scott, this is pretty serious stuff. I said, yeah, we may go to war. You guys might want to learn. Well, we don't have the time to put into it like you do. This was your life. This is what you did. So you got the knowledge, and so we're gonna trust you on that. And I said, okay, I understand that. Then we'd watch football, and the first thing, the coach calls a play, and they go, that's the wrong play to call. This was a 3rd down and 3. You don't send the fullback up. Statistically speaking, da 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 da. I say, how do you guys know all this? Oh, well, we read the sports page. I said, so you've decided that learning sports trivia, sports statistics, is more important than learning about why America might go to war? The answer was yes, because that's what was important to them. That's what made their life complete, not the war in Iraq. And right now, today, we have people who, look, let's again be honest. Unless you're a Russian American or a Ukrainian American, this war doesn't impact you. It doesn't. It's entertainment. We want to turn it on. We want to see the sexy videos. We want to go, ooh, boom, the Russians fired another missile. Oh, boom, the Ukrainians destroyed a Russian tank. Oh, boom, a ship got sunk. Oh, boom, that's entertainment. We don't equate it to reality. We don't sit there and go, those are people suffering. I mean, look, people say, of course we do. No, you don't. Because if you did, then you'd get angry. If you got angry, you'd get involved. If you got involved, you get informed. And if you got informed, you'd realize the government's lying through their teeth about everything that's happening over there. And then you'd want to do something to try and change the policy. But instead, you just sit there and get entertained by this all. And that's what's happening. People are just getting entertained by the deaths of Ukrainians and the deaths of Russians.
It is quite frustrating that people rise up and protest about things of some importance, relatively low importance, over and over. And yet when it comes to things of huge importance, of global importance, you see no uprisings, no protests of any kind. It's a little bit disappointing, but I guess such is the world, or such is the culture that we live in. Let me ask you a few more questions before we talk about your book, last but not least. You mentioned sanctions earlier. So many Western and US corporations instantly and seemingly permanently pulled out of Russia. Every clothing brand, every furniture brand, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, you name it. Now, we live in a capitalistic society, and we're used to criticizing those corporations for only caring about the bottom line and about the corporate profits. These companies were not ordered by any government to pull out. Why did they all gang up on Russia and pull out immediately? Why? I don't think there's even one single company that said, you know what, we're going to put politics aside and we're going to stay in Russia. We're just going to focus on making money. Like, what is behind this?
Well, I mean, and again, I have to say, I'm not sitting on the board of directors of any of these companies, so I don't have personal insight. But what I will point out is that in America today, we we have a what's called the cancel culture, and so there's a knee-jerk reaction that if somebody is perceived about doing something that there's widespread agreement represents reprehensible behavior, that they need to be canceled, that we can have nothing to do with them. It's over. We see that in Hollywood a lot. You know, when an actor gets drunk and says some stuff, suddenly we're not watching his or her movies anymore. You know, we cancel them out. In the case of you know, of Russia, we've been demonizing Vladimir Putin in Russia for a long time now. I mean, literally, he is a cartoon character that's been turned into, you know, the world's most evil man, and we've done that with the Russian people too, because, you know, think about it for a second. If Vladimir Putin's the most evil man in the world and he's been there for 22 years, what's that say about the Russian people for allowing him to continue? They must be evil too. They must be bad people that we can't do business with. We have to cancel them. And so that's what's happening. And I believe that many of the decisions that are being made by these companies are business decisions, because, you know, as big as the market is in Russia, it's bigger over in the United States. It's bigger in Europe. And if they stayed in Russia, they could get canceled altogether in the United States and Europe. So this was a hard-nosed business decision, which is we're not going to do the right thing, meaning that we're not going to stand up and say, hey, look, we've been over here working in Russia for 2 decades now. The Russian people are A-OK. This is a policy disagreement with, now you get to meet my other dog there, barking in the background. But you know, it's a policy, you know, disagreement. But we're you know, maybe we'll pause right now because of sanctions, but, you know, we plan on coming back because this is a good market. These are good people. These are good customers. This is what we want to do. But that's not the cancel culture. I think that's what's happening here. This is purely an extension of the cancel culture that has permeated everything in the United States lately.
To focus a little bit more on this Russophobia and hate for Russians, what is really behind this bipartisan warmongering? Let's go to war. Let's give more weapons. Let's fight Russia till the last Ukrainian soldier. Is it really only coming down to the military-industrial complex and making money? Are politicians really willing to take the risk of escalation, World War III or whatever, just to make an extra buck? Or is there more?
No, I don't think. I personally think that the issue of making an extra buck. Come on. We don't need to bark. You know, making an extra buck. I think he's barking at you, but he's a brand new puppy. We just got him, so he's learning the whole house and he's learning everything. So we'll see. But the military-industrial complex is about making money. It's just like any business. It's about making money. But they make money off of U.S. taxpayer dollars that are allocated by Congress. So let's stop pretending that this has only to do with Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. It doesn't. This has everything to do with the United States Congress, who makes policies and implements those policies. And Congress it takes its direction from the voters, meaning what the voters will allow is what Congress will do. So this poor little puppy. Just a hey. But no, so I'm not one of these people that puts all the blame on the military-industrial, military industry. This is just
multiple issues now.
If it's not one thing, it's another. It's but come on, buddy. He's dug in deep under that, under the desk. But okay, we're gonna work through
okay.
this.
He has something to say. That's fine.
Pardon?
Maybe it's his objection. Maybe he is challenging you on your ideas.
I think he is. I think he's telling me that that I have to go do my research. But the point is, I don't think this is about just military industry. I don't think this is about making money. This is about stupidity and ignorance. First of all, the United States is very much a nation that has war in its DNA. We've been at war for the vast majority of our history. We worship war. We worship our military. We put our military on a pedestal. We treat them all as heroes. And people say, well, they are heroes. Not really. Some people do heroic things, but simply joining the military does not make you a hero. It means you took a job. You get trained to do that job. But, you know, we feel that we have to make everything about, you know, the red, white, and blue, glory, charging the hill, hoorah, let's go. Everything has to be that dramatic moment. Every moment has to be that dramatic moment. Every conflict has to be about, you know, that Hollywood, you know, imagery and all that stuff. And we don't focus on what war really is. It's about people killing people. That's it. That's all war is about. It's about.
So why are they all supporting this? Why do they all?
Because they don't understand that. They only watch it on TV. They watch it in the movie theater. They think, you know, if Saving Private Ryan wasn't just visually stimulating, but we had a button that you could push so you could smell what guts smell like. I don't mean to be too crude here, but or when they pass by the bodies, let's smell what a body smells like 3 days after sitting out in the sun. Oh, that's a nice smell. When the smell of war is something that the average American has no clue about. That's why they like it. You won't find a genuine combat veteran that'll sit there and tell you how wonderful war is. Fact is, at the end of the Second World War, almost every combat veteran wouldn't talk about it. They didn't glorify it. They thought it was horrible. They were ashamed. Many people who go through combat are ashamed of what they've done because it's about killing people. It's difficult. So the average American has no clue whatsoever. So they've bought into this romanticized notion of the glorious defense of Ukraine, not realizing that every time we send another $100 million over there, we're condemning 50, 60,000 Ukrainians to death. And again, death isn't glorious. It's not what they think it is. These bodies are being torn apart by artillery. They're their lungs sucked out by thermobaric weapons. It's just, or they get gut shot and then they crawl into a corner and they spend the next 36 to 42 hours painfully bleeding out until they get sepsis and they die of a painful infection all by themselves. That's what war is, but we don't focus on that. We think it's glory. We think it's wonderful. We're providing these weapons to the brave Ukrainian defenders who are fighting the evil Russian invaders. We don't deal with the reality of it. If we did deal with the reality of it, I don't think too many Americans would ever support this.
Would you agree, Scott, that if America wanted to make a deal today, they could have brought Russia to the table, give in to their demands, reasonable demands within reason? I believe you believe that their demands are unreasonable, and put an end to it in an instant.
I don't know nowadays, to be honest, because I think we could have done that. I think that's something that could have happened early on in this conflict. But to be honest, I think Russia suffered too many dead, too many wounded, too many losses. Russia's in no mood to go. Russia has paid too heavy of a price now to give the Americans anything. The Americans don't get to come to the table now and try and negotiate a settlement that's beneficial to the United States. You missed that window of opportunity. I think right now Russia's in the business of seeing this difficult task through in a way that best benefits Russia, which means they're going to solve some of the very difficult problems that existed that the United States could have helped with before we, you know, remember Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, our job is to make Russia pay a heavy price, to make Russia hurt, to kill Russians. I mean, that became the U.S. policy. So why would Russia ever want to sit down with Americans now? I wouldn't. If I were Russian, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near the United States, because you're the guys who wanted to. Remember how angry the United States, how we got here in America when the rumors came over about the Russians paying the Taliban for bounties, and how absolutely outraged. It was a false story. It never happened. But how outraged we were that the Russians would pay the Taliban to kill Americans.
They wanted it to be true on the media. Yeah, they wanted it.
They definitely wanted it to be true. But now, you know, and again, when you parse it down, you say, well, why do you believe it? They came down to one incident that took place outside of Bagram Air Base where I think 2 or 3 Americans were killed. 2 or 3 Americans, that's a bad thing. I'm not, but they're saying that was what they think was the Taliban killing Americans using Russian bounty money, but it turned out not to be true. 2 or 3 Americans, and we're outraged as a nation. We've implemented policies that are killing thousands of Russians, and we expect the Russians just to be okay with this? I don't think so.
Politicians really need to think before they say things like, let's weaken Russia or let's bring Russia to its knees, like the British guy said. They really need to think long and hard before they say that. Scott, last but not least, I know your brand new book is coming up. Please tell us what inspired you to write it, what it is called, what it is about, and why everyone should read it, and show it to us.
Well, there it is. That is the book. It's called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Arms Control in the End of the Soviet Union. What inspired me to write this? Living the life as an inspector. I mean, I think, you know, when you look, I'm 60 years old now. So when I look back in time, and look at the friends that I've acquired and accumulated over time, the period of time that I was a weapons inspector in the former Soviet Union was one of the best times of my life. It was one of the best jobs I ever had. It was an adventure. It was an adventure that I performed with my fellow Americans, but it's also an adventure that was done in concert with my Soviet counterparts. And it was an adventure that had consequences. I don't think people today understand what it was like to live in the 1980s under the threat of imminent nuclear annihilation, where we had these nuclear weapons. The Soviets had their SS-20 missiles, 3 warheads each, that threatened Europe with instant, annihilation. We responded by deploying ground-launched cruise missiles, the Glickums, and then the Pershing IIs. Pershing IIs that, if launched, could hit Moscow within 7 to 9 minutes of launch, reducing the Russian response time, so that if there was an accident and we accidentally launched a missile, Russia wouldn't understand it was an accident. Russia would just hit the button, fire everything, and the world ends. That was the reality of the 1980s. And Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev were able to sit down and say, we need to bring this madness to an end. We need to get rid of these weapons. But they didn't just get rid of the weapons. How do you do it in a way that people have confidence that you got it done? Prior to that, arms control verification was done using satellites almost exclusively. But satellites weren't good enough. You couldn't ascertain to the degree necessary to have confidence that somebody wasn't cheating. So they needed the human element. They needed to put inspectors on the ground. And so what we were doing was, for the first time in history, inspectors were going on the ground in a reciprocal fashion. They had Soviet inspectors in the United States. We had American inspectors in the Soviet Union working in a cooperative fashion to get rid of these weapons. And what I was doing was putting in place a monitoring regime, a monitoring facility outside of a Soviet ICBM factory. They built intercontinental ballistic missiles. I write about in the book, but the first 3 missiles that we inspected, we nicknamed Des Moines, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. Out of the theoretical cities they'd be aimed at. We can joke about it, but if you think about it, it's true. These missiles were produced so they could deliver a nuclear warhead to an American city. And we monitored the production, not because we were concerned about those missiles. We were making sure that those missiles, that they weren't covertly using that missile production capability to produce the prohibited SS-20 missile. But we put this system in place. We started from nothing. When we first arrived in June of 1988, there was just a field. There was nothing there. A year later, we had a housing area. We had a data collection center. We had, the cargo scan X-ray facility. We had, infrared measuring devices all installed. Much of that had to be installed in the winter of 1988, 1989, when the temperatures got down to like minus 50, minus 60 degrees. Some of the hardest conditions imaginable, and yet the Soviets and Americans worked together to put this thing in place and make it happen. It was an important time. I think the book captures this moment in history, but not just that. It captures the potential of two nations who were at each other's throats to overcome their differences and work cooperatively to eliminate a threat to everybody. And when we take a look at the situation today, what's the one thing everybody's afraid of? Nuclear war. Everybody's saying, will Russia use nukes? Will America use nukes? We're at a similar situation today that existed in the 1980s, where both sides are dangerously close to a nuclear threshold being crossed over that would bring end to human life as we know it. And people are, struggling. How do we get out of this? How do we get out of this? Well, we have a template. We know how to get out of this because we did it already. And this book is that template. This book captures exactly how we did it. And so I think it's an important read from that perspective too. It can provide hope because we show. I through the book I show how we did it, how we overcame the impossible to get this done. And also, we spent a lot of time talking about, getting to know the Russian soul and getting to know the Russian character. This book is about that. This book is about our interactions with the Russians in Votkinsk. It's also about how we were seeking to implement this arms control treaty during a time of great social upheaval, perestroika. When I arrived in the Soviet Union in June of 1988, what was going on TV at the time was the 19th All-Union Party Conference. Any student of Soviet history will know that's when Mikhail Gorbachev convened this extraordinary conference for the purpose of dethroning the Communist Party, dethroning the party of Lenin, dethroning the party of Stalin, and replacing it with a democracy where he would be president, not just general secretary, president. There would be a Senate-like body, the Supreme Soviet. There would be the Council of Deputies. There was an election in March of 1989, and I write about it in the book. I got to go watch the election take place, the first ever free election in the Soviet Union. It was democracy in action. And so I talk about, we lived there in Votkinsk. There was a newspaper called Leninsky Put, The Way of Lenin. It was the town Communist Party newspaper. People say, oh, it's just propaganda. Well, actually, no. It captured what was going on in Votkinsk. And for us inspectors, it became a window into Soviet society. We subscribed to it. We read it. We learned about the problems. And the beauty of it was, as perestroika advanced, as glasnost, openness advanced, the newspaper advanced with it and started to be more probing about what the real problems were in Soviet society. And so as we're progressing it from an arms control perspective, at the same time, we're watching the Soviet Union transform into something new. And it wasn't necessarily something better. It was a difficult time for the Russians, but this book captures that as well. And like I said, it's I think for anybody who has a bent towards history, this captures a unique moment in time that no other book has come close to this. It also captures arms control history. It captures the nuclear policy. It's also a human story. I think when you read it, you'll see there's a lot of humor in there, because when you go through difficult times, there's some you got to find.
Да дурака валяли. Разговаривать. Почему же тогда в утилитарном государстве, Украина утилитарное государство, правильно? Великобритания утилитарное государство, Германия утилитарное государство. У них есть один
В Соединенных Штатах федерализация? В Соединенных Штатах федерация? Слышал? Да? Да? А как называется? Соединенные Штаты Америки. Это федерация? Ну, королек всегда сразу. И снится нам неровно космодрома, небо ледяная синева. А снится нам трава дома, зеленая трава.
Их, в общем-то, всех и назвали русские, потому что это глагол. Русский — это какой, чей отвечает.
Карташовский был. Мы сделали украинскому говорили чему. Украинец. Да. Украина, которая создана. Мы покровительствуем. Не надо испытывать наше терпение. На любой выпад. У нас есть достойный ответ. Вплоть до самых крайних мер. И я хочу напомнить горящим головам под оранжевыми знаменами. От Харькова до Киева 480 километров, а до границы с Россией 40. Вставай, страна огромная, вставай на смертный бой, фашистской силой темною, с оранжевой чумой.
Тебя связали кумачом и опустили на колени. Сверкнул топор над палачом, а приговор тебя прочел кровавый царь великий. Гений!